But I would like to touch a few words about why it's important to pay attention to your B2B pricing, and then how to think about it. It's the biggest part, and a bit of advertisement at the end about how Stripe can help, especially in the very early stage. And so yeah, skipping introduction directly, maybe just moving to Stripe. So Nick, you mentioned that you already use Stripe. Maybe some of you don't know what Stripe is. So Stripe is basically providing infrastructure, economic infrastructure for the internet, making sure it's easy to accept payment and to move money online, which is a recent concept. It's a recent idea. Stripe was founded 10 years ago. You can see the first website. We were all once very early stage startups. So again, we know how you feel. And in the different years that followed, you can see the breadth of products that were launched. So we started with payments because it was the most painful pain points that founders had then, and slowly as they grew and as we were talking to them, which is also a very good thing to do, talk to your customer a lot, we were able to uncover other pain points that they had once they were able to go past that first pain points, which was payments. So I won't explain every one of those. You don't need those, but it's just a way to signal that Stripe is growing, and it's also like shipping a lot of products to help you scale your business. So that gives you like an image of all the what we're able to produce in the last 3 years. Also, one interesting idea to have in mind, like we have more than 1,000 engineers working on payments, and so basically it's a way for you to offload that complexity to us, and we love payments so much that you can focus on your product and on your customers instead of having to reinvent the wheel. Usually our customers start like that. It's a quick overview of the path they take from idea to like IPO. Most of you are in the first or second phase, so to validate the idea or start the business. But there is basically every product at every stage of your company. We'll talk about payment links at the very end, but it's very important to test your willingness to pay as early as possible to make sure you have a business and you're not just like nudging with an idea. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can see the different types of customer we serve, from like a global millions of global business across industries and business model. Some biggest companies in the world, some that recently IPO'd, and other like fast growing startups. The key message here is that if you choose Stripe, you can grow your business on the same stack, and you can just like make a decision and then grow. And it's also a signal that you can benefit the same infrastructure that a public company, which levels the playing field for you and give you the best equipment and the best infrastructure right from the start. So that was just a quick intro. Now let's dive in on the topic. So we help startups with our products, but we also try to help them through like knowledge, like this session. And so we have partnership with Jellyfy in Italy, for example, and also with early stage investors. We want to make sure the most ambitious founders, beyond using the best tech and the best stack, can also use some of the best practices that we've seen across so many startups that we help worldwide. And pricing is a very important topic for many reasons. Of course, when you're enabling payments, like the pricing conversation comes quite fast, and it's very healthy because you're building businesses, so you need to get paid, and you need to get paid a fair amount as well. And so before we get started, I wanted to address some of the objections that most founders have when we talk about pricing. So maybe you have some of them. So the first one is that I'm going to give away my solution for free to get traction. The second is about, just pricing is about setting a price point, and usually that's something you do at the very end after built your product. And also, I have so many other approaches. I'm just focusing on building my product, and I just don't think about how to position my pricing. Those are a few red flags about pricing, and I'll try to address them right away, because it's very, very key to think about your pricing as thoroughly as possible. First, the freemium model is not the best acquisition strategy for everyone. So it may work in some instances, but it's not the silver bullet. Pricing is more than price, and that's something we cover today. And then pricing is also a forcing function, because it forces you to build the right product for the right people, and the right people, the right customer is really key here. So pricing is very, very fundamental to your company. Do any of those like red flags resonate with you at that stage of your growth? Okay. So let me move to like why it's so hard to like think about your pricing. So first, you're innovating in new spaces, so you don't really know the benchmark. You don't really know how to put some like euro amounts against your product. You lack customer data. You're just getting started, so maybe you haven't talked to customer that much. Your product is unfinished, so you're a little bit shy about pricing it accordingly. You have ambitious cost structure, and maybe you have also not enough time because you have so many other priorities to deal with. So you don't have the time to do like proper customer research about that. But yet, it's like the consequences of all that is that many of the founders we talk to are just guessing their prices, and worse, they just like delay the decision until the very end. Whereas they should put that decision front and center during the phase of building the product and talking to the prospects and the customer. So pricing is more than just like price, and that's also one of the key ideas I would like you to just remember after this session, because it shapes your product strategies. Your pricing is an information. It's just more than just like money moving ends. It shapes the perception of your product. So 10 years ago, when we started Stripe, and you can see the website again, our founders, they decided during the beta to price the products above the average at the time. It was 5% per transaction plus $0.5. At the time, the competitors were like 2.9% and 0.3 in terms of the fixed part of the pricing. So they deliberately choose to overprice the product. And so by putting a premium on yourself, you're decided also to raise expectations. So it forces you to build a great product, it forces you to build a great team. So it acts as a forcing function. You want to be the premium. It also comes with higher expectation from your customers. It also trigger the customer to select themselves. So a very cost-conscious like customer who wants shop for your solution, you will just attract other types of customers that are maybe less price sensitive, but because they value other things. And that's also something that we'll see later, is that value is a spectrum, and value is not equal to pricing. You can deliver another kind of value beyond just the pricing. And for Stripe, for example, it was the ease of implementation that was more valued than the price itself. And so the developers back then, they were inclined to pay more if it meant an easier implementation. So you need to find out the trade-offs, because price can be the dimension that you actually maximize then. It's also the second aspect is that it's your most effective investment. So if you think about what levers you can use to increase growth, you can increase acquisition, retention, and monetization. Monetization is basically the people you already have. So the customers. So if you raise prices, that's the best way to increase the revenue and thus the valuation of your product. So that's not something to overlook. The third dimension is also it signals market potential and your ability to capture it. At some point, if you want to raise funds and if you want to talk to an investor, they will want to understand what is your total addressable market, the famous TAM. And so what they would do is they will take the price and they will multiply that by the volume, and it will give them kind of a bottom-up approach of how big the market is. And so the higher the price, the bigger the market. And it's also something to have in mind when you're just talking to investor, because you need to factor that in the discussion to make sure it makes your startup attractive. So again, you can see pricing is way beyond price. It shapes your product strategy, it shapes your business decision, it also shapes your investment potential. So if you think about it, it's very at the center, at the intersection of product, market, and price. That's where pricing is. And what you want to do is, because you are thinking about pricing, you want to find, product market fit, and you want to have like the right types of wheel to climb that hill towards like product market fit. So make sure you have the correct pricing to actually win that market. So that's all. Another like piece of information I want to share with you is that pricing is iterative. So it's not, the goal of this session is not for you to come up with, okay, I found my ideal pricing, it's the perfect one. You are going to iterate a lot on it. And so the first one won't be the right one. It will be certainly wrong, but at least, you start to have this habit of, like changing it and improving it, especially in the early stage. The pricing is not as important as you can think, because your first early adopters, they probably are more they should be more risk averse, and so they should be fine with testing something that is like more expensive, because they value other things. They value like testing something new, something like which is faster, or they value other dimensions. And so you need to make sure that you're able to also like focus on those dimensions, and not just on your price. And then value is relative. So not every user has the same willingness to pay, has the same preferences, and it's your job to find out who are the one that are willing to pay you more because they value other things in your product or in your service. So again, think holistically. Don't think about just like it's all about the price. It's actually about other dimensions, and it's your job to find them. Any question about this part?
Actually,
yeah.
I have a question, if it's possible.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Basically, when you're saying pricing is something that moves during the time, the first price is not right. Actually, it was in our experience, because it was very difficult for us. We had like a product that was unique, so it was difficult to establish which one was the right position for the goods that we were preparing. But it's correct to say that it's better to going from a lower price to a higher price than starting from a higher price and going down. Can the consumer think that you are losing value of the price? Because our idea was we start high because we thought was better, because we had a premium product. But after we noticed that maybe the expectation was too high, so now we want decrease the price. Is something correct to do? I know you need to know more about it, but just in general.
Yeah, it really depends on who you're serving.
Yeah.
But basically, you want to maximize the revenue, because that's the reason why you might not survive is not because of your competition. It's about your ability to have enough revenue to keep on going. And so it's really important to serve the people who have such a big pain points, that are willing to trade the money against the cure for the pain points. And so it's more about selecting the one that have that pain. And so instead of just lowering the value that you're lowering the price. But obviously it all depends on the value you're bringing, and that's something we'll cover in a bit, because as you will understand, like your price and the value you create are very closely linked.
Okay.
If you're able to create 100 euros in value, you can capture part of it. You cannot capture every 100%, but you will be in a much better position to capture 20%, 25%, because you're able to demonstrate that. If the value created is not clear, or if it's not quantifiable, then it becomes way more problematic for you to actually say like I earn like 10% or 5% or so on. And so that's one way. And the second reason is, as I mentioned, like the pain point needs to be very acute and very important and very frequent for people to just like part with their money to you. So think about, you have like a toothache and, you just like, you cannot sleep. You're just like, in that specific case, you want to, you're way more than willing to give the money because you want the pain to go away. So it all depends on what you're building and how severe the pain point is. And so that's the two reasons, but we'll cover that like in a bit. But thank you for your
Thank you so
question.
much.
Jerome, I have another question. You briefly mentioned about the freemium model. So what's your view on running pilots or proof of concept for free? So do you agree, or do you think customers should start paying and recognizing value since the beginning? And the freemium account, do you think it's also just a way to generate bad leads? What's your view?
Yeah, as a startup, again, you need to prioritize people who pay you. Because especially if you go to meet like with like corporates or like those types of people, they have all the time in the world. You don't. So your superpower is speed, and you need to survive. So anyone that take you for a walk or ask you very customized like requests and so on, they're just like, you're not in the service business. You're building a product. It needs to scale. I mean, again, caveat if you're in the the VC kind of game. If you're not building a VC backable startup, and if you're building a SMB, it's another discussion. But that's the kind of the backdrop of my advice is like, if you're building something that can scale, and if you have the ambition to scale, in this case you need to really prioritize people who are willing to pay to you. And again, you need to find your early adopters. And I think that's the core concept. Early adopters are less price sensitive. And so you need to find people that value less price and more other things, because they want to be the first to test that solution, because they want to, they have other types of needs that may be weird for you, because maybe for you, you prefer price among anything else. But trust me, out there in the market, there are always a tiny part of the market that value other things. It's your job to find them first, instead of going to the one that are later, the later adopters who are, they just want to pay less. And so that's not with those ones that you're going to start the fire. In order to start the fire, you need to have the right pieces of wood. And so you need to find the one that are more willing to just like pay right away, because they see another part of the value, and it's your job to make them think about the value. And that's the hardest part for sure. But the more they're focused on their pain and the value you're providing, the less they're focused on the price.
And once you find them, what's your suggestion on conducting adequate pricing research and testing? Because obviously you say pricing, it's an iteration process, so it's not just set at the beginning. So what do you suggest to our founders to test and do also all the pricing research on this?
Yeah, that's something that I'm going to cover in a bit, so I don't want to postpone myself.
But
But
sorry.
it's true, you need to have an assessment on how much value you're creating, but also how much, like, what are the alternative and what is the competition. It's like the 3 dimension of where your pricing is going to stand. So you need to do a bit of homework in order to understand where they're coming from. And each customer segment, which will have not the same preferences, not the same like alternatives and so on. So so that, yeah, but I'm going to cover that in a bit. So basically today we're going to cover 3 parts, and I'll say a few words about the 4th part. So the most important in terms of having a framework. So the goal of this session is really for you to have like some kind of techniques to do that. First, it's your customer persona. You need to be crystal clear on who are you serving and who you are not serving. You cannot serve everyone. As a startup, you need to pick and know deep who you are serving and who are your best customer. Because if you're in the business of creating your price around the value being so personalized to who you're serving, it won't be the same to everyone. So you really need to own in the audience, and then understand the value they are expecting, deriving, and then price accordingly. So customer persona is very important. The pricing metric is more the units, about how you're going to price against which unit. And this unit has to be tied to value if you want the customer to actually make the trade between the value they receive and the price that goes out. And then it's the amount of the price per unit per the value. And so that's where you need to have like alternatives, competitor, and the the value you create in between to make some assumptions and to make some tests. And then we'll talk about the package, or how you package your solution in terms of the pricing pages. But the core focus is on the first three. So pricing only works really if you have an in-depth knowledge of your customer. That's really key. So I don't have the answer, you don't have the answer, your customer have the answer about your pricing. And I want to say, and again, with the caveat that not all your customer, but the right customer. So you need to be very, very rigorous in terms of choosing the right customer. So no matter if you have like a bottom-up approach, meaning that you have some kind of product that sells itself, or if you have like a top-down approach, if you have a sales team, or if you are the seller, because usually at that stage you don't have a sales team, it's you doing the selling. You have a buyer. There is a buyer, and so you need to understand the buyer. All the buyers are not homogeneous, and so you need to really, really go deep with the buyer. In order to have buyers, you need to gain exposure. So you have like many tricks to get people out the door. You have professional networks, referral, email, customer. It's all the growth hacking, tips that you know. But then you need to run interviews. You need to run research to understand, what are the pain points, the willingness to pay, and so you need to make them talk. And it's really key. It's part of the selling process. It's about shutting up, or at least asking the right question, so that you get an understanding on the perspective. And the more they feed you data points, the more you are able to reverse those data points in terms of the pricing you're going to serve them. So my advice, especially in the early stage, don't try to overreach, and show maybe 1 to 3 customer groups max, like very focused, narrow down to some. Again, the role of the startup, if you want to grow, is you need to earn the right to grow. And so be very, very tangible with 1 or 2, and then earn the right and the means to grow to attack the 3rd and 4th and etc. So really key to just focus first. And so you need to understand, like, who are you selling to? Developers, designer, product manager, like be very, very specific. And when I say specific, I really mean it, like the job titles, the stage of the company, the priorities, the pain points, the willingness to pay. You need to have some kind of identity card of who they are. One thing that even works, you can give them a name, like I'm targeting, I don't know, Paul, that is like a designer. He works in a company that does that much revenue, etc. Because that way your whole company, your whole organization is focused on serving Paul, and you only look for other Pauls. You're not stretching yourself to serve Paul and Max and like Justine and so on. So you want to make sure you're very rigorous. Otherwise, you're going to exhaust yourself. So have those heuristics because you are going to be able to find the right customer. You can go even deeper if you want by having more kind of like dimensions, but maybe it's a little bit over engineering this, but it gives you a perspective on how much you can do. You can even add unit economics, like how does it cost to acquire that one? What is the lifetime value? Like, is it worth it? Because some customers are going to be bad customers. They're going to be customers that you don't want to serve, and you need to fire them instead of just like trying to serve them, because maybe they will churn right away because you don't have the right positioning, or you don't have the right product or the right features. So it's really key for you to just like narrow down on the one that you can serve and that are valuable to serve. Don't feel bad about firing the one that you don't want to serve. It's really key because they will drag you down, and maybe you'll be able to serve them later. If you have read the news recently, Brex, the company that creates like corporate cards for businesses, they actually like stopped serving SMBs, and they shut down their operation to SMBs because it was not worth it to them, and so they decided to focus on enterprise customer only, and startups and funded startups. Yeah, I think we have a question. Georgia?
I saw someone who raised their hand, but I don't know if it was a mistake or because I don't see in the chat box any questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So build your ideal customer profile. Be very like ruthless, prioritize, and so you need to. My advice is like look for people who have like a frequent, urgent, important problem, because the pain will be like day in, day out, and so the more they think about their pain and your solution, the less they think about the price. Niche down. like niche down and double down on the niche to get traction, and then everything becomes easier because it becomes way more, you know, focused on something tangible and concrete. You don't try to be anything to anyone. You're very, very specific, and in that case, you know the person, you know what they want, you know how much value they expect, and you know how much, you know, money they can allocate to that. Write it down, be very specific. So you've seen some templates, you know, with firmographics, demographic, technographics. Like, be very, very, very rigorous about who you're targeting, and then you, like, put some even like data-driven definition. You've seen in the last one that the revenue level was different, the price, different price points, the CAC, and so on. So be also like data-driven in your approach, in order to explain to you and to the team who you are targeting and who you are not targeting. In this case, they had like target and anti-persona, people they don't want to serve because they tried and it didn't work out in terms of unit economics, for example, or because the product was not right for them right away. And yeah. In terms of like the go-to-market, obviously every product is different, but if you're targeting enterprise in the early stage, it's really hard because the deal cycle is very long, the expectations are very high, and so on. Sometimes your product may be, you know, brought up market against your will, and it's your job to understand, you know, why are they using the product and so on, because sometimes you may discover things, but it's hard to go right away to enterprise. In the case of Stripe, we started with developers and we started with like startups, and then slowly we were moved to up market. But it's really hard to execute that right away because, again, the deal cycle is very long. And as you remember, speed is your superpower. So you may die in the process if they take too much time. Of course, if you nail them, like it's a big contract, but it's kind of winning the lottery. So you may want to, you know, gain momentum and gain speed before chasing a whale right away. But of course, like there are exceptions. And yeah, any question about this section about like the customers and the targets? Any kind of anecdotes or any stories that comes to mind?
I have one in a meantime while our founders are thinking about it. When and how is the right time to raise prices without losing customers?
Okay, so I'll cover that at the end, and I'll give you some red flags when people like tell you like how cheap you are and some others like question. But yeah, I'll cover that at the pricing level right at the end.
Oh, okay.
But yes, for just for the customer, like, okay, so like again, first focus on the customer. So second, like the pricing unit. And so if you think about, you know, how to establish your price, you need to understand, like, you know, your perspective. So your perspective is basically you have your cost of goods, and then you have your price, and the difference between your price and your cost is basically your margin, and it's your incentive to sell as a founder, as an entrepreneur. So that's what you care about. That's definitely not what your customer care about. They cannot care less about your cost. It's not like there is nothing for them in here. So what they care about is that they care about the value you create for them, and then they care about what the price. So what part of it will cost them. So that's what they care about. And so your goal is to increase the value because that's when you can increase the price. So the more value you create, the more money you can capture in the end. So it's really about like try to understand the value. And in order to understand the value, you need to talk to the customer. That's why it's so important to select the right one in the start, or at least to have an understanding on who they are. So in this case, in order to understand, you know, the value, because you want to be pegged against the value, you need to define the high level value of your product. In B2B, usually it's like incremental revenue, it's reduced cost, or it's reduced risk, or it's time saved. So if you think about your company, what is the superpower you're enabling your customer to have? And so you need to be really, really clear about one of those dimensions. And then the second part is that you need to be able to measure one of those dimensions. And it's important because if you say you save like 100 euros, they need to they need to measure that, and it's your value metric. So you need to have a metric that is aligned to the value you're creating. So always put yourself in your purchaser, in your customer shoes. And so a great way to do that is think about the email you're going to write them, regarding your company. So by using our solution, you will unlock 30% of your sales team bandwidth. You will be able to bring an extra 50 million in revenue with the time saved. This ensures you will hit your company goal, etc., etc. So try to frame that in the wording of an email, because then you'll be able to also adjust the script and the copy of your website, for example, or even the way you talk to them. So try to start with the value you're creating for them before again trying to think about the price and the pricing unit. The pricing unit, you need to test some, because unfortunately most of you won't have a value metric that is pure alignment with the high value units that we discussed. So you need to find a proxy that needs to be as close as possible to the value you create. So let's take an example, HubSpot. HubSpot, you're probably familiar with what HubSpot is. They provide tools to build websites, publish content, manage social media, and so on, to convert leads into customers. And so the value metric ideally would be the amount of revenue. They increase the revenue of the customer. And so they want to be able to take credit for part of that revenue that they increase. But obviously it's hard to measure, and it's hard for their customer to agree which percentage should be credited to HubSpot. So they had to find other ways to align with that, we increase revenue that is acceptable by the customer. And so they selected a few, and they could have selected the number of contacts, the number of visits, the number of users, and so on. But that ultimately, it's your customer that needs to choose the one that is the most comfortable. So my advice for you is select 5 to 10 metrics that are close to the value you're creating and test them with your customer. Not just test them, but you need to make them choose between one or the other. You need to find out what are the relative preferences between one or the other. Ultimately, you need to understand, what unit drives the most value and the least value. So again, talk to your customer, make them choose. Do you prefer that one or that one, that one or that one? And in the end, you'll be able to find out one or two pricing metric that will resonate the most. When you have one of those one or two metrics, you need to make sure that they are aligned with your cost structure. Because if they scale, your cost structure needs to scale. I mentioned earlier that you don't need to pay attention to your costs when you build your price, but still you need to make sure it's realistic. So for Stripe, for example, as you can see on the slide here, our revenue is, our cost structure is aligned with our revenue is aligned with our cost, because we make our customer pay a percentage of the transaction. And so our costs are also a percentage of the transaction. So it's aligned, and it can grow. It's not divorced from the two. Then it needs to be predictable and simple, so that the customer, they feel comfortable selecting the price and paying it. So if you think about Slack, for example, when you have a Slack customer, you pay by active user. So if you don't use the solution, you don't pay. But they could have priced the service very differently. They could have selected you pay by the number of messages you send, because it's a good proxy to the value they create. They enhance interactivity between the teams. But the issue with that unit is that it's making very difficult to predict how much you are going to pay at the end. So they selected something that is simpler, that is aligned with the value they create, which is the number of customer and the number of users that are active. And then the last dimension that you need to check is it's optimized for growth. So for most SaaS, the easy way is per user. You price per user, and sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not, and it's actually a limit to their growth. So the per user is kind of a legacy to the pre-SaaS area, where you had a CD and you were paying by license, and you had to pay the license and then use the CD and so on. If some of you are as old as I am, maybe you remember. And now that it's all SaaS and it's all on the cloud, you pay per subscription, and so you may pay by user, but you still may pay by seat. But sometimes it doesn't make sense because, for example, let's take HubSpot. HubSpot, if they were to make their customer pay by seats, maybe user would be inclined to share login, and HubSpot wouldn't have as much money from large customer versus small customer. It can be a limit to growth in some in some business model. And so maybe people wouldn't be as incentivized to use HubSpot, and it would create friction to spread HubSpot inside an organization. So instead, they decided to give unlimited seating, but they are pricing per contacts. But so by the number of contacts you're generating for your business. And so it helps spread the use of HubSpot, and it's also still aligned with the value they are creating, which is increasing the revenue for the organization. So that's something that you also need to think about. Sometimes you fall into the easy like per seat model. Sometimes the per seat will actually be not the best idea and would be not the optimal solution. So that's why it's important to talk to your customer and devise those metrics very rigorously by making them choose and by checking those different like front runners against those like 3 dimensions, align with the cost structure, predictable and simple, and optimize for growth. Any question about how you select the metric? Okay, so maybe move on. So we have discussed the customer, we have discussed the value metric. Now maybe like the stuff that you're most interested in is like the level of price. And so if you think about it, like let's take a step back. This is how the dynamics at play when you're setting your price. It depends if you're in a competitive market. If you're in a competitive market, you're going to be pegged against competition, existing products, and need to be, you need to be evaluated against those. For example, I don't know, if you have a B2C app, you'll be, people will think about how much they pay for Netflix, and they will like think about how many Netflix I'm going to pay for this. If you're in a category creation, then you have more leeway to align yourself to the value you're creating for your customer. So again, it depends, but even in the case of competitive markets, my advice is don't copy paste what your competition or your supposed competition is doing, because maybe you're not catering to the same customer profile. Maybe you're not selling to the same person, especially in the early stage. So do your homework. Don't try to use short circuit. Talk to your customer and select a niche and try to understand the problem and the willingness to pay of that niche. And I have an anecdote about the copy pasting situation and a cautionary retail. So this is short. This is Circuit. Circuit is a cautionary retail because they built a route optimization software to improve efficiency of the last mile delivery. And when they started, they assumed that the competition had a better understanding on what the user wanted and were willing to pay. So they just copied their pricing. They're a little bit lazy, so they copied the pricing. They begin with a subscription, $5 per month, and that's it. And they kept the pricing the same for 15 months. And then they finally increased it twice, and they finally charged you $20 a month, while their competition was still charging $5 a month. And what they saw is that it led to an increase and a significant and immediate increase in the average revenue per install. So people were still buying your product. And so what they realized is that keeping the price at $5 for so long was one of the largest mistakes they made. And that's the founder that is telling that. And we'll understand why they did that mistake. So here is important, because you've selected the right audience and you talk to them, you're less inclined to do that mistakes. So don't outsource your thinking about your product to your competition. Make sure you understand, the trade-offs of your customers before putting your price there. Another dimension to consider is like the value created relative to the user alternatives. So that's something that is like very well put by Teamflow. Teamflow, they built software for like virtual teams. And it's interesting because when they build the pricing page, they also highlighted what's the alternative. And sometimes your competition is not actually your competition in the sense that they are another business. Sometimes competition is another way to do the same things, but more manually or like old school. And most of the time, that's your real competition. And so you need to understand how people are solving the problem you're trying to solve better. And sometimes, in that case, like physical space was the solution. And so they wanted to provide a better solution. But by putting the current alternative, front and center, they were able to, like highlight the value proposition they were having and how better their solution was. So again, be mindful and conscious about, you know, what are the alternatives, and not just in the sense of your competitors, but also like the other ways to solve the problem you're tackling. There is another example to also help your customer understand the value that your product is creating. So it links, educates, and they connect employees with to educational opportunities to transform training budgets. So training budget, like they need to make their customer understand that it's an investment. It's not just a cost, so it's an investment. So part of the education there of the pricing page is to make sure they realize that. And sometimes, you know, you need to think about, you know, how much employees are going to churn and how much time you're going to, you know, have to find a replacement. That's as a cost. And so part of your role is also to sometimes highlight those costs. Sometimes those costs are hidden. They are just like considered like it's going to be that way. And so maybe you need to make sure your customer understand them, and you can, you know, help them try to reduce them. It's not like something that will stay on that forever. And it will also make the cost, highlighting the cost of the pain is a way to, you know, put your price in a good light. Always use the cost as the cost of the pain as a villain in your story, because if there is no villain, then your price becomes the villain, and you're going to, you know, you have to negotiate, and it's not going to have your price go down, and so that's not where you want to be. So create the villain. In order to create the villain, you need to understand, you know, the cost that they are incurring right now. And if they have no costs, maybe there is no business for you, because if they have no pain points and they don't, you know, deploy any money to solve that problem, maybe there is no business. And so you need to pivot and to find another pain point to tackle. That's something like the bad news here is that you won't be able to capture all the value you create. That's impossible. That's the graph I showed you earlier. It's a little bit unfair because you're creating so much value, but you're not going to capture everything. If you think about it, if you were to capture everything, they wouldn't have any incentive to use your solution. So you need to give away some of the value you're creating. The goal is to understand how much value you're creating in the first place. So if we go back to the circuit story, they at some point, you know, they made that back of the envelope calculus. They said like, okay, a standard delivery is like 160 hours per month. The cost is $10 per month. And so their solution were enabling 10% faster delivery. So they were saving 16 hours per month. So $160 per month saved. That's the value saved. So that's the high level metric. You know, they are reducing costs. And so they were able to understand that, you know, they were saving 160 in value and they were pricing 5 per month. So they were capturing 3.1% of the value they were actually creating. And so when they rose 20%, it was still acceptable to the customer. But so for the customer, it was not a big lift, but for them, they quadruple the revenue. It meant a lot. So again, try to understand, you know, how much value you create to capture as much as possible. You won't be able to capture 100%, but between 3% and 12%, it's already a big increase that can help you, you know, grow faster, hire more people, raise money, and so on. But if you don't do your homework in the first place, you won't know, and you will underprice yourself. And that's the biggest lesson of this session, is that the biggest risk you're running is to underprice yourself. And so that's where you need to be very, very conscious and self-aware about the value you're creating, in order to say, okay, I'm very aware of, I'm creating that much value for you. The price is that much. It's fair. Like it's a deal. The more you index on the value you're creating, the better and the easier the conversation around price will be, because your customer will think about the value they are going to take from your solution and less about the price. Another framework to use if you want to, you know, understand where you can price and at what level, is to use this Van Westendorp framework. It's a Dutch economist in the 70s. Instead of asking your customer how much are you willing to pay, because it's not the right question to figure out the price, you want to triangulate basically how much they are willing to pay you. And so you want to understand, you know, how low is the price where like it's so low that they doubt the quality. You want to understand when it's a good deal, when it's still expensive but they are still, you know, still considering buying it, and when it's too expensive. And by asking those questions to the same kind of like niche audience that you've selected in the first place, if you have 1 or 2 or 3, but you're going to triangulate the range of pricing that is optimal. It's not about selecting the right optimal price, but it's order to understand, the range that where you can start to price and iterate and increase your solution. Again, you don't want to be off the map. That's the goal. The goal of this session is really to make sure you don't end up like circuit, where you could price yourself at 20 instead of 5 and losing so much time and momentum. So you asked me when is the right time to raise prices, Georgia, earlier. And so three red flags. If your prospect don't push back on pricing, it means that you're probably leaving money on the table. So you need to be you need to be in conversation where they are pushing back a bit, and you need to be fine with at least you need to have at least 20% of pushback at the very least. Even worse, if your customer tells you how cheap you are, and they tell you you're so much cheaper than the competition. Again, that's not somewhere you are going. You want to be. Being the cheapest option is not a viable path to survive. And so, I mean, again, that's not the Stripe culture anyway. So it's better to index on value creation than just bet everything on price, because there will always be someone that is cheaper than you, and that will put you out of business. And then if you have added new feature without monetizing them, it's probably time to reconsider, because your product has improved, the value you've created has improved. So it's only fair that you're able to extract more value. And again, make the story about the value you're creating. You focus the attention of your customer about the value they're going to get out of your solution, and less about the price. The less you talk about value, the more they're going to focus on the price. That's the issue you want to avoid. Another like quote from Mark Andreessen, the famous founder of Netscape and general partner at Andreessen Horowitz, the legendary like VC in the Silicon Valley, is always urging founders to raise prices. It's from the High Growth Handbook. It's a book that is available online. We have Stripe Press, which is our publishing arm, and the book is free. It's written by Ella Gill, which is a famous operator and business angel. You can find it on the Stripe website, and I'll share the link. It's a very manual for like every founder, and I really highly recommend it to you, because it's a manual, so you can read each chapter. But there is one interview about Mark Andreessen, and he says, I'm going to quote it if you allow me. He said, first of all, raising prices is a great way to flesh out whether or not you have a moat. If you do have a moat, the customer will still buy because they have to. The definition of a moat is the ability to charge more. It's like pricing, it's pricing power. So the number one, it's just a good way to flesh out that topic and really expose it to the sunlight. Number two, companies that charge more can better fund their distribution efforts and their ongoing R&D efforts. So it's like the snowball effect. Charging more is a key lever to be able to grow, and the company that charge more therefore tend to grow faster. And so counterintuitive to a lot of engineers think that there is a one-dimensional relationship between price and value. They have this mental model of commerce, like they're selling rice or something. My product is magical and nobody can replicate it, so I need to price it like it's a commodity. No, you don't. In fact, quite the opposite. If you price it high, then you can fund a much more expensive sales and marketing effort, which means you're more likely to win the market, which means you're more likely to be able to afford to do all the R&D and acquisition you're going to want to do. So we always try to snap people into a two-dimensional mindset where higher prices equal faster growth. And so that's really, really key about don't think as a consumer, where as a consumer, as a person, you think like lower prices is better. As a founder, as an entrepreneur, you want higher prices. But in order to sell the story about the higher prices, you need to focus on the value you create. In order to do that, you need to understand who your customers are, what they care about, and what are the pain points, and select the one that have the bigger pain points and the less incitation to price. That's the whole story. Then probably the question is how you break the news of rising the price to a customer. And so there is a good example of Oltre AI. They are building software to basically move from audio to text. And so I'm one of the user, and so they sent that email to me, which I think is really well built. And And so they contacted me directly first to tell me the news. It's not a very pleasant task to tell your customer that you're going to raise prices. And so I like that they used a 5C framework. So they contacted their customer directly. They clue them ASAP. So the change is going to happen at that time. They correlate higher prices with better quality. So again, very important to make sure there is a link between the value and between the price. They added a discount. As you know, like as you are a very like a long customer, you will have a discount for a time period. And then they re-emphasize the value prop of the new plan. Again, value again. So it's possible to increase prices. You should increase prices, but there are ways to do it that make people stay and stick with you. Don't feel wedded to your price so long. Your startups, you're iterating, you're changing fast, so it's only fair that you're growing and you are able to price more. So basically like the few takeaway here are: it's critical that you test your price, you treat your pricing as a product. So run experiments and iterate. What I mean by experiments is it's not about like having A/B testing at the early stage. You don't have A/B testing. Like it doesn't really make sense because you don't have enough data to do A/B testing. So it's about talking to your customer, understanding them, understanding their pain points, and make it regularly. The rule of thumb is like refresh your pricing every quarter or two. Don't be in the habit of having the pricing set in stone. The more fluid it is, the more your customer will be, in the habits of, okay, they are raising prices. So if you only raise it once in the 2 years, then they can, you create the surprise. It's something that is bothering them. So make sure like you're iterating on your pricing as much as you're iterating on your product. And then there is a rule of thumb that is easy to remember, is that you need to capture at least 10% of the value you're creating. You remember like circa, they capture 12.5, but the ballpark is at least 10%. And then you can also increase incrementally 5% until you lose 20% of your customer, until you have like that pushback. So it's not a golden rule. It's like a rule of thumb, but be nimble in the sense that don't set your pricing once for all. Make sure you're constantly playing with it a bit and to see how the market reacts. Any question about this section?
I have a couple of questions, Jerome. I would start with the first one. If you suggest to disclose your entire strategy, your pricing strategy on the website, because you showed some example, obviously, where they had like few different type of plans. So what's your view on this one?
It depends who you're selling to. So if you're selling to SMBs and price conscious people, they want to know the pricing right away. If you're selling to enterprise, you may want to have like call us and contact us to understand how much they are willing to pay for your product. So it depends your go-to market. It's a good segue to actually like the packaging way of putting your product. So usually you have like two main ways to do that in terms of the packaging. So in terms of how you are going to put your prices, either you're targeting different segments. So let's say LinkedIn, they target like job searcher and also people who are like they want to recruit people. So there are two population that there is no overlap between the two. And so they can have different plans for different types of people. You have also the good, better, best framework where people graduate from one to the other as they grow. And in this case, you put different features and different price points. In the case of the flavors, it depends. So if you're targeting a SMB and if you're targeting an enterprise, it makes sense to for the first one, you put the price there, and for the other you say like call us and you make something very very specific, because you don't want what you want to avoid like a big customer to pay the same as the small customer, because the value they're going to extract from your solution won't be the same. So it's only fair that you are able to adjust the value. So in your packaging, you can limit some features, for example, so that the self-serve service of your price page like enables you to reach to that big customer, but at some point they will hit a limit and they will need to call you to negotiate a special agreement that will enable you to create a custom pricing and with custom limits to the solution. But you don't have to reveal your price depending on who you sell to. It really depends who you're selling to.
Yeah, clear. And what about also if a customer is confused when they come to your website and they look at your pricing page and they don't really understand what they should buy for the value that we were talking about earlier. So what are for you 3 or 4 essential elements that we should consider and we should have when building our pricing page?
Again, it depends who you're selling to. So it's really hard to say like in general about the packaging. But most of the time, you want to be more intentional about who you want as a customer. So you want to be to make sure you're helping the customer identify like qualify themselves. So first, I would recommend to require cards if you have a free trial. Make sure people you create that friction. Will have less sign up, but you'll have sign up with more intent. People who actually who are better to prepared to pay, because it's harder to nurture people who are not willing to pay at first and then into paying customer. As an early stage startup, you don't have the nuances to do that. So make sure you force customer to select if they are willing to pay or not right away by requiring a card, for example. Second, like the title of your pricing plan should be not like basic, premium, or gold, silver, and bronze. Should be about who are the ideal customer you're selecting. For example, hobbyist, professional. You need to make sure they say, okay, that's for me. You're helping them figure out what is for them. If you're targeting, if you have different plans as well, I wouldn't advise to have like more than 3 to 5, and make sure there is a big delta between the lowest price and the highest price, because you want to have like a big spread between the two. And also, like, don't sell any limited anything. You want to make sure you add a bit of friction, especially because you want to understand the needs of the customer, the enterprise customer. You want them to call you at some point so that you understand, you are able to do that qualifying exercise about, how are you using, what is the problem, what are your solution are you using right now, how much money are you spending on that problem, and so on and so on. That will enable you to again iterate on your pricing. So those are the rule of thumb as well, to make sure you extract information. So especially in the early stage, you want to talk to customer. So it's fine if they call you. Actually, it's fine if you have, because you want to extract. You don't know how much value they are going to extract from your products, even though you're creating the product yourself, which is a bit ironic. But you don't know how they are going to use it, in which context, and so on. So you want to understand their pain points. So it's less about selling the solution. It's more about like, tell me more about the pain, tell me more about how you're going to use it, because sometimes they will use your product in ways that you haven't imagined, and to solve some problem that you haven't considered. And sometimes it will open a niche that you haven't thought about, and maybe you will focus on that niche instead of the others that you initially thought. So if they don't know, just ask them to discuss with them, and make sure like the website has not all the answers, so sometimes it's better to directly talk to them.
Adesso possiamo cambiare perché c'è tra l'altro un uscito separato, quindi hanno più mia utenza.
Yeah, absolutely, totally clear. And as you see so many startups, what are the most common mistakes talking about like pricing that you see?
I think the most common mistakes is not selecting the customer you want to serve, not talking to them, and underpricing yourself. And force keeping the same price. That's really the 4 mistakes. Start with the customer, find the niche, make sure you start with that niche. For Stripe, it was developers. We focused on developers. Now we are selling to way more customer persona, but CFOs and so on. But first it was developers, and so you need to be very, very exigent with make sure you're focused on 1 or 2 max, because you won't be able to to be pertinent to everyone if you're selecting two. So nail the customer, understand their pains, and then price yourself against the value that you're going to create and iterate on the price. Most of the time, because you don't do the research, because you don't know how your product is used, you just index on, I'm going to sell myself cheap because I'm unsure about the value. So I'm undervaluing myself and undervaluing the product. And then you have too low prices, you don't grow, your competition have more momentum, and you die. That's the that's really my advice is like, don't undersell yourself, but in order to undersell yourself, not do that, you need to understand your customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question that we haven't actually covered, but I would like to hear your view. Like, how do you price B2B startups when their solution is still in the validation phase? So they're still actually trying to building up, they're still figuring out their market, their customers. So in that particular phase, what's your suggestion for getting the price right?
Yeah, it's the early adopter equation. So you need to find people who are willing to take risks. You need to again work with the right sets of first customer that are willing to work with something that is not polished, unfinished, because they are willing to test something new, because they want the thrill of innovation, for example. And so there is one component of selecting the right folks, and then again, and understand what are the alternatives, like how are they have a problem, because sometimes as a founder, you're obsessed with your product, you're obsessed with your company, but the pain points is the star of the show. So without any pain point, there is no business, there is no conversation, there is no customer, there is nothing. So focus on the pain, and that pain exists even if you go away, the pain will still be there. So you need to find a pain that is big enough, and you need to understand how the cost of that pain. And so make them talk about the costs, and then the conversation about your price, even if the product is not that finished, you can discount it, for example, if you absolutely need to. But you have a backdrop against that. Again, the cost of the pain is literally vital to position your price. Otherwise, it's going to be like just negotiation for the sake of negotiation, and you will always lose because you're the tiny guy in the discussion. So the more you are able to extract information about what cost them, the more you are able to have the conversation with them, saying like, I'm going to help you solve that problem. I'm going with that, like you use the we, for example, we are going to tackle that. And so you shift of mental focus from your price, oh, it's expensive, because it will always be expensive, if you think about it, to okay, I'm bleeding money over there with that problem, and I need to make sure it's under control. So okay, you have this like painkiller, I'm going to use it. So again, focus on the pain, try to save some time even if your product is unfinished, but focus the mindset of the cost of the pain.
Thank you.
Just to wrap up, we launched last year a product called Payment Links, which is, I think, very interesting for early stage founders like yourself that don't want to put much resources against like payments, for example. So Payment Links is basically a no-code way, so you don't have to have engineers, to basically create a link that enables you to get paid by your first customers. So that way you're able to test if there is willingness to pay for your product without having to commit engineering resources to build a pricing page and so on. So it's really easy to create, and you create a link, you share the link, and you get paid. That's as easy as it is. And so you're able to understand if there is appetite or not. You can use it in different ways. So again, you don't have to commit any kind of engineering time, and so it enables you to focus your engineering resources on your product that is differentiated, and instead of diverging some of the resources. You can experiment with a self-service channel. Let's say you have a sales motion right now, and you're targeting like maybe a big customer, enterprise customer, and you want to try to test if like a very simpler version would be able to sell itself. By using payment links, you are able to create a page, and you can test if targeting a smaller audience would make sense. And then, as we said, you can also test pricing quite easily and iteratively without having to code everything. So it's a nice way to put in place and test all the tips I shared today, about experimenting your prices, like the pricing plans, in a way that doesn't involve a lot of engineering resources. The more you test earlier with minimal effort and investment, the better, because you don't want to have like trouble decision and realize too late that you were underselling yourself. And that's it. So we have, as part of the partnership, you have a perk with fee-free card processing. So if your customer are paying by card, the first 15,000 are free of fees. And we have also a discount if you want to use Stripe Atlas. Stripe Atlas is basically a service that enables you to incorporate in the US if you want to open an account. A Stripe account in the US, especially if you want to raise funds there, usually you need to have an incorporated business there, because VCs won't invest in your startup otherwise. And so the service is facilitating all that. And it's like it's like $250 instead of $500. And that's it. So the wrap up, the 3 ideas that hopefully you remember for that 1 hour discussion. Segment and prioritize your customers. Don't underprice your product, and leverage payment links to test your pricing and use your Stripe perks. I hope it was useful. And
absolutely. Absolutely, Jerome. I really like to thank you. You share with us so many very interesting insights that I hope that will really be useful also to our startups, and they can start to make some changes already from tomorrow. And thanks obviously to all our founders who spend the afternoon with us. So see you soon. Take care.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.